Hi everyone, welcome to the biodiversity unit of environmental biology online. This is a 2-week unit, so I'm going to do one video that talks about the whole unit at once. The thing that this whole unit revolves around is your biodiversity lab. And in that lab, you're going to go to a forest and you're going to count all of the trees that are in a particular area and figure out how many species there are. You don't have to know the names of any trees. You just need to be able to distinguish one kind of tree from another. To say, oh, this is species 1 and this one over here is a little different, that's species 2. Now the lab guide gives a lot more information about specifically how you're going to go about doing that procedure and, more importantly, how it relates to biodiversity. So the first thing you should probably do this week is get the lab guide for the biodiversity lab and read through it all really carefully. You might want to print it so that you can take notes and read through it in a really comfortable way. So once you have figured out what that whole thing means, there's a couple things to do. So one is to actually go out and collect the data, and I recommend doing that as soon as you're able to. The weather can change really quickly, so as soon as the weather seems good, then go out and collect the data. The other thing that you want to do right away is take the quiz on biodiversity. So the quiz just goes over the concepts that were in the lab guide, and it makes sure that you understand the basics of what biodiversity means. Now, once you have your biodiversity data, you want to start analyzing that data. And one of the best things to do when you have data is to make some graphs. So we spent a lot of time making graphs. You know how to make a really good caption. You know how to make a graph that's very clear, what kind of graph to use. You know how to write a really good description for a graph. So that's what you're going to do. You're going to take your data and make 2 really good graphs, a rank abundance graph for each set of data. And then once you have those graphs, you can start thinking about what all of that means. So what you're going to turn in this week for the lab is the graphs, which is part of the results section of a lab report, and you're going to turn in the methods section. So the methods and results are 2 sections of a lab report, and you may have never written a lab report before, and that's okay. You might want to first figure out what a lab report means. So read the resources in week 0, resources for writing lab reports. It explains each section, it gives tutorials for how to write the sections, it gives an example lab report, links to scientific papers, so you can see how scientific writing looks. Our discussion this week is going to talk about what a lab report is. We're going to show you some examples, and we're just going to make sure that we understand the basics of what's included in a lab report. So for the discussion, I've provided 3 sample lab reports, and these are lab reports that students have turned in the past. And they're about a concept called the intermediate disturbance hypothesis, which relates to biodiversity. And these 3 lab reports are of varying quality. In the discussion, each one of you have been assigned to a group. One group is going to look at the introduction, one group is going to focus on the methods, another is going to focus on the results, and the last group is going to focus on the discussion. So go to the discussion right away so you know which group you're in. Then when you look at those lab reports, you can really focus on the section that you're assigned to. So if you're assigned to the discussion section, then you want to make sure you read really carefully the discussion sections of all 3 lab reports. And then in the discussion, you'll answer one of the questions I have about the discussion. You know, what is the purpose of the discussion? How do these 3 lab reports differ in their quality? How do these 3 lab reports attend to the criteria for discussion, for lab report criteria? So in the discussion, once you've written about your section of the lab report, you want to make sure that you go and read about all of the other sections. So if you're supposed to write about the methods section and explain to the class how the methods section works, then you need to make sure that you go and read about how the introduction works, how the results works, and how the discussion works. And I'll be able to see if you've read those sections. So the second half of your grade for the discussion is just about reading all of the other sections. It's pretty simple. So really only one post is required in the discussion this week. Okay, so then the other thing that's kind of layered on here is the home base project. So the home base this week is looking at ecosystem biodiversity. Now this is a little bit tricky, but I think you'll enjoy it. When you go to your home base, you may notice that some places are more swampy than others, some places look more like a forest, some places look more like a field, and I want you to focus on how many different community types do you see in your home base. Maybe you want to walk quite a ways this week. And in addition to saying what community types do you see or how many there are, also think about what are the characteristics at each one of those places that make them really special. What species are there? How many kinds of trees are here? How many kinds of trees are there? Are the kinds of trees the same or different? You also want to get into the soil a little bit. Is the soil the same? Is it more dry here, more clay there, more rock here? Is it brown here and black there? You can also think about how much sunlight is coming down. Does one place have more sunlight than another? Maybe that's why they're different. And then you also want to look at disturbances, which means how humans might be interacting with the environment or how nature interacts with the environment in a way that changes it. So fire, flood, logging, mowing, things like that are all disturbances that can influence what can live there. So the goal is to see how many different types of ecosystems are in your home base area, and then think about why there are these different ecosystem types. Now, if your home base is completely homogeneous, which means there are no differences, the whole area is just exactly the same, then what I want you to do is count species. How many kinds of trees are there? How many kinds of grass are there? How many kinds of birds? How many kinds of insects? How many kinds of mammals? Count the things that you actually see rather than what you imagine will be there. And that will give you another sense of biodiversity. Now, if you want more information about biodiversity, you're welcome to skip ahead to next week. So in there's more readings about biodiversity and what it all means. I've created a video about biodiversity that you can watch. That will give you some really good background information. There's also chapter 13 in Critcher's book. You want to read that. And then there are some extra resources. Some are websites, and then there's a PowerPoint presentation that goes even deeper into biodiversity if you want more information. The PowerPoint is completely optional. Next week, you'll also do a full discussion on biodiversity. So you'll answer one of my questions, which are already set up in separate threads. Each thread is a different concept, so you'll choose the concept that is most challenging to you or most interesting to you, and you'll write a reply to one of my questions. And sometime by the end of the week, you'll reply to another student in a really thoughtful way that shows you're really thinking about the material, shows that you're trying to explain how the material works, that you're being critical in the way you're taking in the information that other people are sharing. And you'll also finish that lab report. You'll write the introduction section, you'll write the discussion section, and you'll do a complete revision on the methods and results section. It's really important that you revise those sections based on the feedback that I give you. So my feedback is to try to make sure that your lab report sections are as strong as they possibly can be. So I'm telling you all the things to do so you can make sure you get an A. And also so you can make sure that you understand how these lab reports work. So you'll take all of my feedback and make a complete revision. You'll also have the opportunity to post your lab report to a discussion forum. It's a peer review forum. So you'll post your lab report and then anyone in the class can read it and give you feedback. There's a special rubric for doing that. It's called the peer review rubric. So it just lists all of the things that are in the lab report rubric and allows you to sort of check them off. Did my colleague do this? Did this other student do these things? Yes or no? So you'll get feedback from another student. And if you post early enough, I'll also give you some feedback so that you can get my take on what makes a really good lab report. If you have any questions, please, please, please write to the helpline. I'll help you. Other students will help you. You can also call me. I really like hearing from my students. You can email me. I'll write you back. Okay, so that's the next 2 weeks on biodiversity. I hope you really enjoy it.